Greetings everyone, this is Johan Martin from Punch Sector Studios, and today we're taking a look at two plugins from Aurora DSP. So the people at Aurora DSP contacted me and asked if I wanted to try out their Rhino and Mammoth plugins, which are amp sims essentially for guitar and bass, but they're trying to get a very complete package. So there's a lot of stuff in there that's going to make it easier to just get your sound all in the plugin, and you won't need that much external processing. The first time I tried them, I just put them on some DIs that I had, and I was shocked by how good they sounded right out of the box, because a lot of plugins sound great, obviously, but it's very common that you have to tweak a little bit, and you know, you might hear that, this sounds pretty good, but I could do some other stuff around it to kind of make it fit more. These were shockingly good just from the start, and I'm not some kind of YouTube hype person who goes like, oh my god, look at this is amazing, oh my god, I can't believe how this is sounding, dude, check this out, dude, it's the best sound in the world I've ever heard. You know, I don't yell about stuff, but these were genuinely shockingly good when I tried them at the first time. So this demo song is I think this is one of the first songs I ever wrote myself, and I think it's from maybe 2012 or something, so it's almost 10 years old by now. It's very inspired by Periphery and Catatonia and a little bit Porcupine Tree as well, I think. which are usually my main influences, or were when I wrote music. So firstly here we have the bass. This is there's one track here which is mainly the distorted one, and there's another one that's cleaner and a bit more fat for the calm parts. So let's look at this first distorted one here. This is how the Mammoth plugin looks when you open it. So let's listen to this without the plugin, just how the DI sounds. You know, it's a good DI, so it's a good DI, which always helps when creating a tone. So then we listen to the distorted signal. So something that people do a lot in metal especially is they split the bass into 2 or 3 parts. So there will be like just the low end on one track, then the mids in one track, and then the highs in one track, or maybe different kinds of distortion. And sometimes you will record stuff with different microphones and do stuff like that. But this is essentially doing that stuff in one plugin. We have the drive section and the bass section. The drive section is what gets distorted essentially, and the bass is a way to make the low end more clean and focused, because if you distort low end it can become very fuzzy and unfocused, which is sometimes a good thing, which is why you can adjust the crossover if you want to. Like you could just distort everything if you want, or just distort the highest highs. Like you can choose whatever you want here, but 200 is a good starting point. So for the drive section here we have 3 different kind of drive styles, and they're based on different, I believe, pedals and amplifiers. So we can listen to how the 3 different drive modes sound. So obviously I've dialed the sound in for the third one here, but the middle one sounds a bit more like some kind of rock thing, and the first one is more like a fuzz, like just brutal, messy thing. That's really nice for, like, you know, stoner rock and stuff like that. You also have a mix knob which kind of blends the DI and the distorted signal, if you want to do that. A lot of people actually have the distorted signal, the bass signal, and the DI signal at the same time. Then we have a basic EQ thing here, low, mids, and highs. Then you have a couple extra things here that can affect the tone in different ways. We got the hot and melt, and the brute, and the Mammoth dial. These are things you can read about in the manual, like exactly what they do, but they some of them affect the frequencies in different ways, or they affect how the distortion character behaves. Then we have for the bass section, it's basically just a level thing, and then the growl is also some kind of distortion, I believe. But for this one I've just kept it clean, basically. We can actually solo the individual sections here, so let's see what the growl thing does. So yeah, it kind of distorts it and creates a lot of overtones, which is, I think this is useful if you want it to sound a bit more messy and not as modern and focused. Then we have a cab section, which I believe only affects the drive. So 610, 412, and 810, what does that mean? Well, those are some basic cabinet configurations. So the first number is usually how many elements the cabinet has, and then the second number is how many inches in diameter one element is. So 610 is 6 10-inch elements, 4 12-inch elements, or 8 10-inch elements. 412 is very common in guitar amplifiers, but obviously there are bass cabinets as well with these different configurations. I like the sound of the 810 the most. It's something that I usually use for other kind of IRs as well. They're usually based on an 810. So I guess there's something to that kind of cabinet configuration that I really like. You can also use any custom IRs that you have, which is nice. And then we have a blend between the bass and the drive sections here. And then there's a slam thing, which is basically some kind of compression thing that might even be multiband compression, which I usually use outside of any kind of bass plugin, where I compress the low end to make it more even, and a bit of the low mids as well. And I believe this does something similar. Then we have the output volume. So this is a very good way of, you don't have to split the signal in different tracks. You don't have to choose between a bunch of plugins outside the amp. So you basically just have everything in one plugin, which is very, very nice, especially if you want to get a good sound going quickly. Especially if you're writing music, I believe that having a great sound from the start means a lot to the flow. Usually people will say that they write music best when it just kind of happens, and when they don't have to sit and worry about every little detail, and when they can focus on the actual music and not have to tweak the sound to sound good before they can start writing. So I think they're onto something very useful here. Then we got the second one. This is my fun way of writing jazz. So this one is made to be a bit more fat and less distorted. For example, I've removed some highs to make it sound a bit more fat and less prominent in the highs, and it's not as distorted as the other one. Let's listen to how that sounds. So it's still a bit distorted, but just enough to cut through a little bit. It's not this kind of high gain thing happening. Then on the main bass bus, I've used a tiny bit of processing. These are some plugins I usually use, but this time I tried to do as much as possible without using anything else. The only thing I ended up using was some EQ and track spacer. I'll talk more about that soon. So I'm just removing a little bit of excess low end and some scooped some mids and some around 200. This is usually where the snare lives, like the actual douche part of the snare. So this I felt clashed a little bit, so I removed some of that. And then removed a little bit of high end as well, because the distortion can become a little bit brittle sometimes. But this is more of a safety thing than anything. So we can just listen without these engaged, and then we'll put it on. Cleaning it up a little bit and removing some of the mud in there. And then the track spacer is just basically a multi-band compression thing being triggered by the kick drum. So something that I want to get rid of is you have a lot of bass information, and then you have the kick drum happening, and the low end has a lot of energy, which can become a bit much. It might trigger some compression later in the chain on the master bus, for example. So this kind of removes some low end from the bass when the kick is hitting. So you can see this moving with the kick. Just to remove some of that buildup, and I also feel that the kick hits a bit harder when that happens. Then we have the guitars. Here the same thing. I've tried to not do as much on the buses and with external processing. So let's start with the Rhino here. So this is the guitar plugin called Rhino. So this one has even more sections to do almost anything you would need for a guitar sound. So we got the input section first. We can kind of adjust the input level, and you have a noise gate as well. There's a high pass filter if you feel like there's too much low end in the DI signal. We have the pre section, which is preamp. So we have the main drive or gain control here, and low, mid, and high kind of EQ, which is the same thing as on a normal amplifier. We have 4 types of amplifiers, so we pretty much got a cleaner kind of thing on this first one, more rocky, than 2 pretty much high gain amps. Then we have the scream, fuzz, push, and brute down here. So first there's the scream, which you can guess is some kind of tube screamer overdrive, which people almost always use for cleaning up some low end and adding some bite and clarity to the DI, and also pushing it harder, because pushing the signal into the amplifier more usually sounds more focused than just increasing the gain on the amplifier itself. Then there's a fuzz, which is some kind of distortion pedal, which distorts the whole spectrum, so that all of that low end will get distorted as well, making that fuzz kind of thing. The push is a compressor essentially, and then the brute is some kind of overdrive as well, with some more options. So you'll notice on every section here we have these small arrows. When you hit this, you get some more control over exactly what you're doing. So here you'll recognize even more what the screamer is doing. The tone, gain, and level, which is usually what a tube screamer style overdrive has. So the tone kind of affects, you know, the more tone, the brighter it gets, the less tone, the darker it sounds. There's a gain for the actual overdrive in it, and then there's level. And, you know, this is how I usually do it. I put the level at the highest and then tone adjust to what I might need. Then the fuzz is just has a gain thing and then a bright button as well. And then the push says comp here, which tells that it's a compressor happening. So you just adjust the amount of compression here you want. And I believe these amount things are some kind of mix knob thing. So you can kind of blend between unaffected or completely affected if you want to. The brute one seems like some kind of overdrive with bass and treble instead of tone. So here you also see some extra options like the headroom, high pass, low pass things, some advanced things there if you might need them. Then we have an EQ, which is very useful because EQing these low, mid and high knobs, it's not the same thing as EQing the actual signal after the amp. So I'm just cutting some low end here at around 100, which is very common, scooping a little bit of mids and adding some high end, which is stuff I would usually do in plugins after the amp. In this EQ section, you can also tone match here, where you can feed another signal. For example, if you got another tone from something that you really liked, and then you can feed that tone in here and it will EQ match that whole thing. Then we have the IR, this is actually 4 IR files. They can kind of blend between with this thing. I think I'm going fully on the 4th one here. Then you can also load your own IRs, of course, just like the Mammoth. You also have a resonance and presence controls, which kind of affects the low end and the high end in another way. Because, you know, you have the EQ here, you have EQ here, and you essentially have some EQ here as well, but those will all react in very different ways. And then the output, you can actually have a limiter and some output gain. Now be careful with the limiter, because lowering this is essentially lowering the threshold, so you will limit the signal more, but it will also have a kind of a makeup gain happening at the same time. So the volume will go up a lot when you move this down, which I learned the hard way. Then we also have some effects, which I'll go through in a couple of the other tones. But yeah, let's listen to just the DIs and then add the amp. So something I thought was really cool is how the low end is very, very consistent. You know, in rhythm guitars, you don't want too much low end, but a little bit can be very nice. And especially in this kind of filtered thing in the beginning, you can hear that the low end is very tight and it's not flubby at all. It just sits where it needs to be. Which I thought was very cool. Then on the rhythm guitars, the only plugin I added afterwards was the EQ, which firstly is this high cut, which I used to automate in the beginning. And then there was one little peak here that was shining through, especially on the tighter parts. And I don't know if that's my DI being weird or my pickups or something. But yeah, that was essentially all I did to the guitars afterwards. Then we have a little layer here, which is just kind of a background thing. I'm using a different amp just to test it out during this. So it's this background thing happening. So it's very like cut off tight thing that's mostly in the background. It's the second amp thing here with the screamer and some compression as well. And basically some slight EQing just to shape it a little bit. Then we have this one clean sound here, which is the first amp, the drive at 0 actually, and some compression to even it out. And we use some chorus here actually. So you have an FX rack essentially, and then there's a flanger, chorus, and phaser. For this part, I'm using the chorus, and you can get some more control when you go into this window. So you have the usual kind of controls that these effect pedals usually contain. And you also have a mix control for each effect. Then there's also some delay and reverb in this time-based section here. So you've got a couple different types of both delay and reverb. So I'm using the delay called delay, and it's a ping pong, which I usually like for guitars. And you have the mix thing here as well on these, and on the reverb, you know, they have the size, the width, and the damping. Or you can have a convolution reverb, which is another use for IRs. So you can essentially, you know, record a space with a microphone, like how that sounds. So for example, you can go into a church, or you can go into a tunnel or something, and basically record how that space sounds, and then you can load that impulse response into any convolution reverb. There's a lot of plugins that do that, and you can also do that here if you want. So yeah, let's listen to how the DI sounds on this one, and then we'll add the Rhino. So that sound was very inspired by the Black Album, you know, the Enter Sandman intro, or the Nothing Else Matters clean sound, which you can only get if you have extremely new strings, and it also helps to play a little bit closer to the bridge. When I want that sound, I usually want that kind of slow chorus thing happening as well. So yeah, that's basically the clean one. There's a different clean one here, which is the more jazzy kind of part. So this was recorded with a neck pickup. There's a little bit more gain, just to kind of break it up slightly. And it's, yeah, you know, made to sound a little bit more like a jazz kind of thing. Then we have a lead guitar here in the orchestral kind of break. This is the third amp. Since the signal is way lower playing on the higher strings, I've added a lot more gain. There's a compression and as well as the tube screamer thing. I've cut the lows a bit more aggressively to not get too much of the pick attack kind of bumping around. I've cut a little bit of high end as well, and some sculpting in between. And there's some delay and reverb here as well. And I've used something kind of in between IR4 and 3. And since this is closer to the middle, that will mean I'll get a little bit of the first and second one as well. So let's listen to the DI. This is gonna sound very puny. Then we'll add the Rhino. You know, you get a lot more sustain from these longer notes if you have some compression, and a lot more gain than I would have on the rhythms. So what I like about these plugins is that firstly, they sound great, obviously, and they also have a very nice looking user interface. Sometimes you want to have, you know, a picture of the amp if there's a special amp sound you're after, but sometimes it can be very nice to just have no distractions and just let the interface look nice, but not trick your brain with looking like the amplifier you want to emulate. And then of course what they've tried to do, and successfully done in my opinion, is that they've added all of these things inside the plugin that you usually would do outside, you know, with pedals and stuff in front, and then the EQ and stuff you could do afterwards, and the IR as well. So you have a complete package where you can just create a tone very quickly, and you have all the controls you need. And you can open the advanced windows as well if you want, or you can just engage something and make it sound good without thinking too much, and then maybe tweak it later. If there's any constructive criticism I would have, is that for the Mammoth, I would like to have some kind of, you know, post EQ on the output like you had with the Rhino. I found that I needed to go and EQ some stuff here afterwards, like you saw, to kind of shape the sound even more, because I found that even though there's a lot of stuff to tweak here, I just needed to get that extra tone shaping out of it afterwards. Also, I would like some kind of compression on the input, which the Rhino also had. It's very common that I compress the bass DI before it's going into any kind of amp, especially if it's an inconsistent player. Now it was programmed here, so I wouldn't have needed it as much, but you can also squash the sound a little bit and make the sustain sound more even, especially for the distortion. I don't want the distortion to disappear too much when the sustained tail is kind of disappearing. I would also like a gate here as well, like the Rhino had. You know, essentially it's just some stuff that the Rhino had that the Mammoth didn't have that I would like. Otherwise, I'm very happy with the Mammoth overall. For the Rhino, there's one thing I was a little bit distracted by this logo in the beginning. It looks very nice, and they put it in the place where it's the least in the way, but it's still a little bit in the way. It kind of covers a little bit of these EQ knobs, so it's kind of takes a little bit too much space, and it was a little bit distraction at first. Just a little bit of criticism there. And then I would also actually like the EQ to be a little bit more intuitive. You know, it's a very capable one, but I would also kind of like to, you know, create points here and drag with the mouse if I wanted to. Now you have to go to the knobs here to adjust to different settings, which is kind of a more old school way to work, which is, you know, it's still nice, but it would be even more in line with this modern kind of user interface and way of getting a tone to, you know, make it even easier to kind of click around. So yeah, as I said, if you liked what you heard and you want to try these out, you can download the demo, of course, and play around a little bit. And then if you want to support me, you can click the link down below and purchase the plugins from that link, and I will get a little bit of cash, and that will help me a lot. If you really don't want to support me but still want to buy the plugins, you can just go into the website and buy it from there. But if you use the link, you have my utmost gratitude. This has been Johan from Punch Detector Studios, and I will see you again next time.